Gregory Mendel. Gregory Mendel was famous for his work of heredity. Heredity is how traits are passed on from generation to generation, and the study of heredity is called genetics. So, thanks to Gregory Mendel, there exists genetics, another branch of biology, which is great because then we have more things to study about and more nights to stay up and learn about biology. So, all thanks to Gregory Mendel. What a great guy. So, who is Gregory Mendel? He's a monk who is also a teacher of science. He taught for a while, but then he spent the rest of his life at a monastery. On his free time, he was studying pea plants. For fun, he kind of mixed them around to see what results he can get from it. And then the results was very surprising, which made him more intriguing. He was studying about the traits of the pea plant, starting off with tall and short, and then he advanced towards other traits as well. So what is Gregory Mendel famous for? Well, he crossed a tall plant with a short plant, and he noticed that in the next generation, there are many tall plants. So he called this dominant because the tall plants took over the short plants, and then the short plants somehow disappeared. He took the two same tall plants again, and he crossed them together, and this time the kids, their offspring, are tall, but there is also one short one, which was very surprising. So this kind of made him very intrigued, so he wanted to study more about it. So he spent 7 years of his life studying and documenting all of the pea plants. That's a lot of work. He spent 7 years for this work and it's written down in our textbook, just a few pages. Wow, what a nice guy. So why did he pick pea plants? Well, one thing, they're very small. So it's easy to control, easy to manage. Doesn't take up that much space. Two, they're very cheap. So it doesn't cost that much to buy. And three, they can self-pollinate. That means the pea plant can pollinate itself and make more pea plant. It doesn't have to touch another pea plant to do that, which is a good thing. And at the same time, it can also cross-pollinate, which is pretty cool because one pea plant can cross with another, which allows Mendel to do his research and figure out how heredity works. Another reason is because they grow pretty quickly. You want to spend time studying something that have many generations quickly. You don't want to spend time with something that takes a long time, like animals and humans, which you don't have that much in your lifetime to spend time studying about animals and humans. So studying about pea plant made it easy for Mendel because they grew pretty quickly and allows him to study generation after generation in a short time. And they're great for food. So if you were to live with Mendel during his time, you would ask him, "Hey Mendel, what's for breakfast?" Guess what? Peas. "Hey Mendel, what's for lunch?" Peas. "Hey Mendel, what's for dinner?" Eggs. Oh, thank goodness. With peas. Oh, okay, so yeah. So 7 years if you were living with him, pea would be pretty much your main meal. So his result, when he crossed a tall and a short one, he got too tall. He crossed the same one again, and this time the short one came back. So he called the tall dominant, and he called the short recessive, which means they don't show up and they skip a generation. At the same time, Darwin was also doing his research on the similar things just as Mendel, but with another subject. However, it became a little bit too hectic for Darwin to manage, so he kind of gave up halfway. Management isn't much of Darwin's specialty. So the work of Mendel took him 7 years to do all this. Afterward, he spent much of his life studying about bees and other stuff too, but it wasn't really successful because his eye wasn't that well and then he didn't have that much time to work for it. During his time, people thought he was pretty weird because, to study about pea, that's kind of weird. It's for us, we find it to be normal because we know the result that come from his work, and we would think those people are weird, thinking that he's weird. But actually, that's not true. Those people thinking him's weird is just like how we feel about some of the scientists nowadays. Like for example, just a few years ago, there was a scientist who asked for a funding to study about the flow of ketchup out of a bottle. Yeah, that might be considered a little bit weird. So the way we feel about that guy might be the same thing about way people feel about him, Mendel, back in the old days. But who knows, Mendel did make progress and he did make history. So maybe this scientist guy who studied about the flow of ketchup might someday make history too. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll find out. Mendel, like all artists, his work wasn't really accepted or glorified. It was not until he died and then around the 1900s his work was rediscovered about 100 years later that it was important to the study of science. So just like artists, your work is only popular after you're dead. And then he became known as the father of genetics. Science is a funny thing. So Gregory Mendel, like other guys like Leeuwenhoek and Ernest Rutherford, who doesn't pretty much relate to science, but then they became famous in the father of science. Now that is funny. For example, Mendel is a monk. He studied about pea plants. He crossed pea plants, which has nothing much to do with science, and then his work turns out to be very popular and made him the father of genetics. Leeuwenhoek, who's just a cloth merchant, who's far from anything near science, was lucky enough to have the microscope discovered during his time, so he was able to advance it, and then he did a lot of study, and that made him the father of microbiology. So two guys so far who had nothing to do with science eventually became the father of something related to science. Pretty cool. Then you have Ernest Rutherford, who's famous for his gold foil experiment. It turns out that Rutherford was in second place for the scholarship to go to Cambridge, and there was a guy who was in first place who was supposed to go, and then Rutherford couldn't go. But the guy who was in first place decided, you know what, I'm gonna give up my scholarship and stay home and get married instead of doing all this important research. So Rutherford, being second place, got the first place and has the chance to go to Cambridge, and that's he did his study, made him famous. So it's better to stay home, study, get married, rather than getting famous and such, and make a change in history. Yep, that's science for you. So these things all in science are pretty much somewhat luck based, and yeah. So if you were to be famous, what would you like to be known for?